devoted merely to educating, feeding, clothing and housing the massive section of the population that is consuming more than it's producing, the under 15s. So neither households nor governments can afford to save as much as they would in a more benign age structure, and therefore modernization of agriculture and modernization of industry is stultified. And in terms of human capital, it's extremely difficult in a country where the school-age population is doubling every generation, not only to raise school enrollment, but to improve the quality of schooling. I mean, it really is a tough order for governments where 5 to 15 or 5 to 20-year-olds are going to double every 25 years, which is the case in Africa, and to ask them to not only improve enrollments of boys and girls, but to increase the quality of the schooling they get. So on both those two scores, development is dealt a serious blow by a population structure of this sort. Age structure is the key to understanding population and development links. It's not that Africa is overpopulated. It is that with that rate of growth, 2 to 3% per annum, implies this age structure, and for those reasons I've outlined, makes it more difficult to accumulate the human capital and the physical capital necessary to escape from poverty. Here are African fertility trends, both past, the unbroken line, and what the United Nations Population Division thinks is going to happen in the future. And they project a sustained decline between now and mid-century. The maverick sub-region here is South Africa, Southern Africa, dominated by the Republic of South Africa, which has very low fertility, as does Zimbabwe. Population issues, an age structure like the one of Korea in 1960 is not an issue in Southern Africa. So we shouldn't make the mistake of painting Africa with the same brush. It is a very diverse region, and the South is quite different from East Africa, West Africa, or Central Africa. You'll notice that fertility decline has tentatively begun, but as I said earlier, it seems to have petered out in some countries and slowed down in many others. I don't know whether you can see those figures, perhaps not, but just to show you the lack of progress on the reproductive front in West Africa, those set of numbers show you from the 70s to the recent years the percent of married women using a modern method of contraception. And there's virtually no progress. There's only one country, Ghana, in which more than 10% of women, married women, cohabiting women, are using a method of contraception. Contraception in West Africa is a total fiasco, a total disaster. And here's a similar display showing desired family sizes over this quite long historical period. And if you can see those numbers, well and good. If you can't, let me tell you roughly what they say, that desired family size in Africa remains much higher than elsewhere. Typically 4, 5, or possibly 6 children are desired. These are women's desires. Men's desires tend to be a little higher, but there is a slight downward drift. But it's quite a different reproductive culture from Asia and Latin America 50 years ago, where desired family sizes are more like 2, 3, or possibly 4. We are dealing with for whatever reason, we could discuss that later, a pronatalist part of the world where where the value attached to children is much greater than elsewhere. Let me go back. I've tried to persuade you that these very broad-based pyramids are hostile to development. But I now want to be a little alarmist, and I think it's justified, by talking about one particular country, Niger, in the Sahel. Where's it gone? There it is. Niger is a country that's lost half its arable land to the Sahara. If you may remember, it suffered pretty nasty famine 2 years ago that was, or food shortage that was only averted from being a major famine by international food aid. Go forward.
Press the left button.
No, I'm doing the left button. I've got to go back. Oh, well done. Here are the indicators for Niger. It's got a population of, it's now about 16 million. It's got a fertility rate of 8 births per woman. Women say they want 8. Percentage using modern contraception is pathetically small, 4%. Life expectancy and infant mortality are very adverse. Adult literacy is terribly low. Percentage of children stunted is high, but it doesn't have an HIV problem. It is indeed one of the poorest, most demographically backward countries in the world. If population remains at that level, by mid-century it'll have a population of 80 million, bigger than any European country. Even if, as the UN expects, fertility declines from over 7 now to 3.5, it's going to have a population of 50 million. What are the consequences of that? It's a staggering increase. It's a fragile ecosystem, a fragile government, divided strongly by different linguistic or ethnic groups. I think the consequences of that huge population increase, and Niger is one of 12 or 13 countries projected to treble in size or more in the next, between now and mid-century. Seems to me the consequences are fairly predictable, that Niger will continue to be able to unable to feed its population, therefore dependent on outside food aid, that there's a great likelihood that these fragile ecosystems with low rainfall are going to be degraded by overcropping and overgrazing. It's very difficult to see anything but a continuation of mass poverty and mass underemployment, and Niger will continue to be dependent on international aid. Now, Niger is a severe case, but it's not totally exceptional. And you know, in the capital of Niger, according to a World Bank report, there have been more meetings on the problems of sexuality in old age, something that's dear to my own heart, but not a priority for Niger, I would think, and more meetings on infertility, which affects about 3% of the population, than there have been on the need to promote family planning. It is a grotesque distortion. And ICPD, and for all I know, the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs are partly responsible for that grotesque distortion of what really matters. Is there a solution? I remember Henry Kissinger called Bangladesh in about 1970 a basket case. Bangladesh proved to be more robust than that and is thriving to some extent. Standards of living have increased, so we've got to be aware of shouting catastrophe without allowing for human ingenuity over the next few decades. Well, how could Niger escape from this sort of Malthusian nightmare that I've projected? It does have uranium. The price of uranium is going up. We're all going to go nuclear, that's obvious, so that's a good thing. Could it mass migrate to neighboring countries? Well, the biggest neighboring country is Nigeria. Nigeria is not typically very welcoming to hundreds of thousands of people from adjacent countries coming across its borders, so that's a dubious solution. Could it survive, as many smaller nations do, on remittances from Europe and elsewhere? Well, remittances, as economists in the audience know, are far more important than foreign aid, so remittances could certainly mitigate the dire prospects that I painted for Niger. Could it attract global capital? I doubt it, not with the very low quality of the labour force at the moment. It's landlocked, which is another disadvantage. It's got a fragile government, a divided populace. It doesn't seem an obvious choice for huge inward investment of private capital. But one thing I'm convinced